You know, history is absolutely packed with these towering, larger-than-life legends. But every now and then, a legend can actually obscure a reality that is infinitely more profound. Today, in this explainer, we're cutting straight through the myth to uncover the incredibly explosive truth about Rani Laxmibai. We're talking about a defiant, unapologetic warrior queen who literally stood toe-to-toe with the most powerful empire in the world. There is this wildly popular myth that she was just a tragic martyr, burned alive by her enemies. It's a story completely drenched in victimhood. But the actual reality? Oh, it's so much more powerful. We're talking about a brilliant, fierce commander who died in the heat of battle and actually dictated her own last rites. The contrast between these two ideas is just stunning, and it completely reframes the true story we're about to explore. To really grasp her extraordinary death, we've got to rewind all the way back to her youth in the 1830s. Long before she was a queen or a rebel, for that matter, she was a girl named Manakanika Tambe, born in the holy city of Kashi. Everyone called her Manu, and after her mother died when she was just 4 years old, her upbringing became, well, anything but typical. She wasn't being raised for some quiet life tucked away behind palace walls. She was being raised for the battlefield. I mean, think about it. Her education was incredibly unconventional for the era. She wasn't just taught to read and write. She was out there mastering sword fighting, archery, and horseback riding. And perhaps most importantly, she grew up running around with boys like Nana Sahib and Tachia Tope. These were companions who would literally become her comrades in an all-out rebellion years later. This wasn't the making of a quiet, obedient consort. This was the absolute making of a warrior. The sheer amount of tragedy she faced in such an incredibly short window is just staggering. Within a single decade, she goes from this seemingly conventional marriage to Maharaja Gangadhar Rao in 1842 to finally providing a royal heir in 1851. But then, just 4 months after that incredible peak of joy, tragedy strikes. Her infant son dies. And as if that wasn't enough, by November 1853, the Maharaja himself passes away, right after adopting a successor on his deathbed. These rapid-fire, devastating blows struck before the British even made their move. So this brings us to the crucial weapon the British Empire used against her, the doctrine of lapse. It was a colonial policy, actually scratch that. It was basically just legalized theft, dressed up nicely in bureaucratic paperwork. For centuries, Indian rulers had the absolute right to choose their successors, and adoption was a completely standard practice. But this new policy just wiped all of that out, declaring that any princely state would simply be annexed if the ruler died without a natural biological male heir. And so the British Governor-General, Lord Dalhousie, launches this swift bureaucratic attack. He applies the doctrine without a second of hesitation. Her adopted son's royal claim, completely rejected. Jhansi is instantly slated for annexation. And then, adding major insult to injury, they offer her a pension of 60,000 rupees, basically a parting gift for stealing her entire kingdom, and fully expect her to just quietly pack up her things and disappear into obscurity. Boy, did they misjudge their opponent. So you have to ask yourself, backed into a corner by the literal most powerful empire on the planet, how exactly does this young, grieving widow respond? I will not surrender my Jhansi. That single, uncompromising sentence. It draws a crystal clear line in the sand. That's the exact historical moment that marks her absolute transformation from a marginalized widow into a formidable, undeniable rebel leader. And she immediately shifted into active leadership. When the Great Rebellion breaks out in May 1857, the local garrison mutinies, leaving this massive power vacuum in Jhansi. She doesn't hesitate for a second. She takes control as regent for her son and proves herself to be a highly capable, hands-on administrator. She's out there actively organizing troops, inspecting and fortifying the city walls, and she even sets up a foundry to cast her own cannons. She spent those months relentlessly preparing for the inevitable defense of her home. The reckoning finally arrived in March 1858. The ruthless British commander Sir Hugh Rose shows up with his forces, demanding unconditional surrender. Her answer from the ramparts? It definitely wasn't a negotiation. It was a fight. The scale of the resulting siege is just horrifying. 2 grueling weeks of relentless British bombardment. And through it all, the Rani is literally everywhere, dressed as a soldier, directing the cannon fire herself. She even gets a massive 20,000-strong rebel army, led by her childhood friend Tachia Tope, to come try and break the siege. But they just get completely crushed by Rose's disciplined forces. Tragically, the British breach the city walls on April 3rd, and the ensuing slaughter claims an estimated 5,000 defenders and innocent citizens. But here's the thing, the queen was not captured. In a daring midnight escape that sounds like it's straight out of a movie, she fled the fallen city under the cover of darkness. She mounted her horse with her young adopted son tied securely to her back. Surrounded by her loyal guards, she became a fugitive, riding out to regroup with other rebel leaders at Calpe just to keep the fight alive. What happens next is a stunning victory that rapidly unravels. So the rebels managed to capture the massively powerful Gwalior fort without even firing a single shot. It's incredible. But then they make a completely fatal tactical error. While the other leaders waste all this precious time celebrating their new fortress and treasury, they completely ignore the Rani's desperate warnings to prepare for a counterattack. And sure enough, while they're celebrating, Sir Hugh Rose and his cavalry are already charging swiftly towards Gwalior for the final showdown. June 1858. This moment right here, this is the ultimate truth of her character. She didn't cower in a palace waiting for rescue or worse, capture. No way. She put on a cavalry uniform, mounted her horse, and rode straight into the absolute heart of the battle against the British 8th Hussars. The actual mechanics of her death show absolute, undeniable agency. Caught in that incredibly fierce fighting, she was unhorsed and grievously wounded by both saber and gunfire. Her loyal attendants managed to carry her from the battlefield. But listen to this. Her final order wasn't some desperate plea for her life. It was a tactical, fiercely proud command to protect her honor. She ordered them to cremate her immediately, so her enemies could never capture or display her body as a trophy. Her followers built a hasty pyre, and her body was consecrated by fire by her own people, strictly on her own terms. Listen to how a British officer reportedly described her. Here lay the woman who was the only man among the rebels. Look, yes, it's a deeply historically sexist comment, born of that era, absolutely. But it reveals a profound irony, right? The very colonizers she fought so hard against were the ones who ended up immortalizing her sheer will and military genius. Even General Rose, the man who relentlessly hunted her across central India, had to officially declare her the most dangerous of all the rebel leaders in his own military reports. That admission, coming directly from her literal nemesis, tells you everything you need to know about her iron will. So, bringing it all full circle back to the myth, we can clearly see how a tactical, fiercely independent decision to avoid capture was slowly twisted over the decades into a passive story of being burned alive by her enemies. The reality is not one of a passive victim subjected to desecration. It's the story of an active, brilliant commander achieving a final, magnificent personal victory in her absolute last moments. I really want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. Why do we so often prefer these comfortable, neat legends of female martyrdom over the fiery, uncompromising reality of female power? It's worth thinking about how we choose to remember the active agents of our history. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today. And remember, never stop questioning the legends you're told.